This paper is entitled Filtering Techniques for ADS-B Trajectory Preprocessing. So it's actually basically, when we build the proceedings, we insist a lot on reproducibility of results. And this is actually, for this paper, we're doing it the other way around. It's already reproducible, but the point of this presentation and of the paper is to explain how things that people who've been using the library, the functionalities that people have been using in the library, just to explain how it works and why we implemented things that way. So I'm the first author of this paper. I'm Olive, and it's actually, I will be presenting contributions by a lot of people, like many people in the community, but most of the work has been done by Jan, who from the Zurich University of Applied Science, who's here, Benoit, who is in another continent now, and Richard, who from ENAC, who is also here. So basically, there will be actually two presentations, one today, so that's why I said like traffic series number 1, and there will be another presentation tomorrow about another functionality that will be for the end of towards the end of the program. So we focus here on one specific method in the traffic library, which is called a filter. So basically, how the library works is that all the data that for most of you download from the OpenSky database, you can manipulate it as a pandas data frame, and these data frames are wrapped into classes. One is for, like, let's say, many trajectories, and one is for one trajectory. So I would say, like, for every flight, you can apply one of those methods, which is called a filter, and magically, most of the nonsense disappear. And the point of the presentation is to explain how this works. There are many filters. Like you can also pass some specific classes, like this Kalman filter, that you can pass it in this function, and you get also a filtered version of your trajectories. So about the outline of the presentation, I will spend, let's say, half of the time explaining the sources of data and the sources of errors that we mostly see in ADS-B data. I will spend 50% of the time on the description of filter, and the extra time is the buffer time that we got now, so then I can be longer in the presentation. So about sources of data and errors, I will, so there are actually, when you decode data from on this frequency, the 1090 frequency, where ADS-B is actually, when we say ADS-B, we're focusing on a specific, what we call the downlink format. So this is the F17, that is among the data, like this, one of the specificity of this format is that the data is actually broadcast by aircraft, and because of that, there's actually a CLC check on the messages. There are also other messages that are sent and collected by OpenSky database that are not CRC checked, but that are also full of useful information. And so they're all in various tables on the database, and I will here focus on some of them. Like there is, for example, 4 and 5 with this surveillance altitude reply, surveillance identity reply, and also more useful information in 20 and 21. One of the sources of the problem is that you see actually here altitude written twice, and you also get altitude in the ADS-B messages. That's 3 sources of message for altitude, and we will come back with altitude issues a bit further in the presentation. So just for a start, apart from the actual ADS-B messages, it's actually difficult to guarantee that the message you get is actually has not been corrupted. So this is one of the kind of problems that when you plot, so this is an altitude signal for one flight, and sometimes what you see is, well, okay, you get most of the altitude signals you get look like a regular altitude, like descending profile for an aircraft, but you see also some other points that are, well, here it looks like they're shifted actually. Maybe this looks like there's one receiver with wrong time information. So the thing is that when you get modest messages that only include timestamp information, some of the receivers that contribute data to OpenSky database, they're equipped with GPS clocks. So once you have the GPS clock, well, you can also provide this very precise timestamp that's also useful for multilateration later. But there are other very much cheaper decoding devices, and which also they have so there is you can have inaccurate system depending on how the timestamp information is provided. You can have basically the system clock, which is completely drifting if you on a Raspberry, for example, or sometimes some system would use the clock from the cheap RTL SDR device. Then you get even more drift, and that's probably one of the reasons why you get this drift for a few points here in the trajectory. So this is when you have this kind of points. What we would like to be able to do is to actually invalidate all those shifted information. You probably don't need those extra points, which are anyway drifted. So you would want to be able to remove this data points. This is another much more common pattern, is that you get also your altitude profile with some noise. And you get some extra points that are completely irrelevant. Like one data point is slightly above 3,000 feet, slightly below. This is from my investigation. This is mostly due to extra data coming from messages which are not CRC checked. So they downlink format 4 and 20 that I mentioned earlier, and then when some higher level abstractions are built in the OpenSky database, like the state vectors data for tables that most of us are using when we are collecting trajectory data, when this high level abstraction is built, it's taking some of the wrong points, and then you see this kind of peaks in the altitude, and you also just want to be able to remove those irrelevant data points when you do your studies later. So this is not really noise, this is more artifacts that you see in the data, is that so the altitude, you don't get all the real numbers of altitude, of course, in your data. Coming through ADSB, you also don't get floats, you actually encode this altitude information. So according to messages, sometimes it's on 11 bits, and you get increments of 100 or 500 feet, and sometimes it's on 13 bits, and you get increments on 25 feet. So that's why you would see this kind of, it's also these gaps between altitude values can look irrelevant with respect to the physics of the aircraft, but it's just a quantization artifact that you may also want to filter. So outside altitude, there are also other sources of information that other decoding artifacts that can go wrong. So basically, just to explain a little bit more here, that is a champion of this kind of explanation is Junsi, but I'll try to be as precise as him, but in one slide. So all those ADSB messages, so that's the DF17, and you also have other messages that are not decoded in the OpenSky database. You only get the raw messages from so DF20 and DF21. They actually, part of the message that is inside consists of what we call BDS blocks, and every block would contain some kind of information. In one message, you only get one block. So the most common that we get in ADS-B are on the left column, that you get the airborne position or the surface position or the aircraft identification, that's a call sign, or the airborne velocity. And when you are basically with ADS-B messages, you get some of the bits that will encode which kind of BDS you're using. You have room for that. There are other BDS as well. So on the right-hand side, they are not found in ADS-B, but they can be found in the downlink format 20 and 21. So in 20 and 21, you can also sometimes find some BDS blocks from the left column, but you mostly see things from the right-hand side, and there are more BDS as well. So for example, the ACAS resolution advisories that we've been using for one of the OpenSky report a few years ago, the selected vertical intention, and we'll mostly like actually the 50 and 60, so track and turn report and heading and speed report, because we get the airspeed information from those messages, whereas in ADS-B you only get the ground speed. So the problem with DF20 and 21 is that there is no extra bit to say which kind of BDS we are using. This information in 20 and 21 is replied to a secondary radar query. So when the secondary radar wants to decode that information, it knows what it asks, so it can say, well, I don't need the bit to tell me, I don't need you to tell me what kind of message you're sending, you're just sending what I asked you. But when we're listening, like from OpenSky receivers, we don't know what has been queried, so we have to guess, basically. So from some messages, it's quite easy to find, okay, this is this type of message or this type of message because of some, well, for example, for some BDS blocks, you know that you have this range of bits that must be equal to 0. So then it's like, if it's equal to 0, you know it must be this type of message. But there are also some BDS blocks that look very much alike, and it's the case with 50 and 60. So sometimes, well, you decode, you say it can be a 50, it can be a 60, and sometimes you're just wrong. Like you need more information about context to see what kind of value is relevant or not. So that can lead also to some wrong decoding. So here is, for example, for one flight. So the ground speed is from ADS-B. In orange, you have the true airspeed that's from the BDS block 50. The indicated airspeed is from the BDS block 60. And you see, for example, during the climb here, we have few points that have been wrongly assessed as BDS 60, and that's but you get crazy values as well. And if you're wrong with your decoding, well, there will never be any like perfect decoding without knowing what has been queried, but you want to be at least able to filter those irrelevant information. You also have some inherent noise in some measurements. So here I'm mentioning also some, I forgot in which BDS block it is, but you have two measurements for vertical rate. One is based on the barometric measurements. The other one is based on both the barometric measurements and on acceleration measurements. They reconstruct a vertical rate information. So you see in blue, that's the barometric one. In orange, you see the barometric plus inertial information. We've been, and we wrote a paper a while ago about how this actually is this noise. So you can look at the difference between the two signals, and the noise that you see in the blue signal relates to turbulence experienced by the aircraft. And when the turbulence is really big, so I was actually on board this aircraft when you see this big gap, that was a very strong turbulence, making some people shout. In position messages, you also get some noise. So you see here three kind of wrong position data. So on the left-hand side, that's ground position. You can see in orange the pushback part of the trajectory. And you see some like big gaps. That's most probably due to GPS multipath on the ground. The middle trajectory is actually some part of the some trajectories that has been spoofed. You see the part of the So in blue, that's actually the multilaterate trajectory downloaded from Flight Radar. In orange, that's what we see in OpenSky. And so it's good to have the real trajectory in blue, but what has been actually sent in ADS-B was the orange one, and we see actually part of the trajectory has been spoofed in the. So that's actually in the western part of to the western part of Ukraine. Yeah, like in the top is Poland and Slovakia, and yeah. So it's been spoofed to some part in Ukraine. On the right-hand side, you see another, that's in the Gulf area, that's not spoofing, that's, the thing is when you decode positions, you did 2 messages, and when the timestamps go wrong, like you don't get, let's say you get a poor synchronization of messages, you get sometimes, there's even messages, odd messages, you did 1 of each to be sure about the position. You take some guarantees with the timestamps. When things go wrong, you can be wrong with your position, and you actually, yeah, if you are a bit smarter, you can remove those irrelevant data points that are out of the trajectory. But that's here. That's not spoofing. So now about the filters. So we see like a lot of noise can occur in the data that is sent over ADS-B, and what we want to basically do is build some trajectories with more reasonable data. So about, I will present so here several categories of filters, and what we actually prefer here is filters that are actually fast to compute, because when we compute those big amount of data, we don't necessarily want to rerun a lot of post-processing. We just want to be able to quickly remove the erroneous data. So one of the methods is to proceed by rolling windows. You build very small windows of time. So we call usually this interval a kernel size. You move this window along all the signal, and you do some processing inside that window. So here, what you see in orange, you would say, so what is called a mean filter is that you're moving this little window and you average all the values that you have, and you get some signal. So here, the big gap is slightly removed. With a median filter, it's easier to also be closer to the general trend than with a mean filter. Well, there's the original version of the filtering that was in traffic was doing something slightly different. It was also moving windows and looking at the average noise, the standard deviation of the signal inside that window, and removing data points that are outside the 3 sigma interval inside that window. So that was a very basic filter that worked like 99% of the time, but of course there are always corner cases when things wouldn't work, and that's why we need more like variety in the filters that we get. Anyway, the rolling window approach that works quite well in general, yeah, that's basically the idea. So the thing is, you're moving a small window, and the problem is sometimes you get wrong data for a bigger interval than the size of your kernel. If you take a kernel that's too big, you are smoothing your signal too much. If you take a kernel window that's too small, you're missing. So here, like on the left-hand side, you filter the wrong data points, but on the right-hand side, you see the kernel size of your median filter is too small, and then you don't filter some of the trajectories. By the way, all those illustrations, it's actual data on the OpenSky database, and it's the actual implementation of the filters that is running. So here, that's actually Jan worked best worked a lot in this part of the work, and one of the other approaches is to look at actually to say this gap that we have. Here, in the first place, this gap is not relevant. It's not possible to pass in 1 second from 10,000 feet to more than 30,000 feet. So we look basically at the first derivative of the signal, and we say, well, more than, for example, 5,000 feet per second is not a reasonable gap in the value, so we can invalidate this data. We can work with the first derivative, second derivative. Well, the more you go, like it's more time consuming, but it filters better your data. Then Richard also came with another contribution about so what we call consistency filters. Not the best naming. If you have a better idea for naming it, you can submit a pull request. So basically here what you're doing is more looking at the signals and the derivative, and you're looking, well, since we know about the vertical rate and we know about the altitude, like, are those values consistent? Are these gaps in altitude consistent with the vertical rate values that we have? And the idea then is to try to build the longest path among all the possible path in the values that are in so he builds a graph basically based on all the possible paths that are reasonable between the signals and their derivatives, and then like try to build the most probable one among that. And well, on this plot where you see this time difference issue before, after, some crazy thing everywhere, it actually filters quite well the signal. Actually, yeah, other approach is to come just with regular Kalman filters. That's a bit slower, but it's actually, the good thing is they perform well. We all know about Kalman filters. We all know about the equations. You can also, a nice thing is you can also re-inject some of the uncertainty information that's encoded in ADSB data to fit the covariance matrix of your model. It's also easy to, I will come back to this outlier detection. Just one thing, so there are two ways to do this Kalman filter thing. I think the easiest way is to project your trajectories in local projections, and you have X and Y and Z, and you project your ground speed and track angles. You get dx and like dx on dt, dy on dt, and then you have a linear model that is very easy to put through the Kalman filter. If you do with an estimated Kalman filter, basically you can come with the real signal that you have, but you need some more equations just to compensate for the non-linearity of the model, and it doesn't improve much in the end on the model. So in orange is actually what you get if you go with a regular Kalman filter. So you see it's, well, you're filtering your signals, but when you have wrong measurements, it still considers that the measurements are supposed to be true, because you have this uncertainty information that's encoded. It doesn't compensate for the wrong value that you get, that you would get for other reasons. So it's actually easy as well to include some outlier detection. You have a way basically to say in the middle of the process to look at the measurement and say, are they actually reasonable with respect to the covariance matrix of the measurement noise that you know? Are those values reasonable or not? And if they're not, you can just propagate the signal only with the dynamic of the model without looking at the measurements. And by doing that, you get the green trajectory, the green filtered signal that works much better in this case. So I guess that's a bit of an overview of the filters. About how it works in the traffic library. As I said, you have a flight. So that filter, by default, it takes this filter above sigma median. So that's a rolling window. You look inside the rolling window as a standard deviation. Everything outside, that's a parameter. So by default, it's 3 times sigma, but that's also a parameter that you can adjust. And you invalidate all the values that are outside the average noise, let's say. There's this, what we call this aggressive version. It's actually a combination, a cascade of several filters. So it starts with a median filter with the right default parameters, then followed by a derivative, a clustering filter I didn't mention here, and then finally another rolling window min filter. So actually there is this vertical bar operator that's just an operator that's implemented to cascade filter. That's not really equivalent to filter median dot filter the next filter, because there's also some work that's done once you have invalidated some of the data. But yeah, you can think in the first approximation that it's the same that chaining just many filter operations. The good thing is that you can also implement your own filter. So there is actually this, you just create your class. You need a method that's called apply that takes a data frame and that returns a data frame. If you come, because you have better ideas, you come with your own class. You can pass that class to the filter method. You can chain it with other filters. It will just work. And there's a set of filters that are already provided in the library. So there's this consistency filters I mentioned. There's a Kalman filter, a smoother. The Kalman taxiway, we presented that a few months ago. That's another filter for ground trajectories to match them to taxiways. It's also provided in the library. If you have a filter that works particularly well, there's a button on GitHub that's called pull request, and we can include it as well. That's how. That's what Jan did. That's what Richard did. That's why we have more of those methods now in the library. And that's all. If you have questions, I'm happy to take them. Actually, I'm on time.
Oh, you're 15 minutes early. You didn't use your extra time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation, and I think it's a lot of useful stuff. If you've been working with ADS-B data, you probably have come across similar issues. I think we can also accept questions from the online audience. Is that correct? So any chat is open here. Perfect. Okay. So the online audience is also encouraged to ask questions, and for those in the room, please raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone for the audio connection.
Hey, Xavier. Hello.
Good to see you.
Okay. There we go. Okay. I'll ask 3 questions, but you answer whichever you want. First one.
So the bathroom is over there. If that's a question.
One of the first concerns I have is about a lot of these filters sort of smoothing off, higher order derivatives. So whether it's turns or like, vertical accelerations and stuff like that. We found this somewhat problematic when doing, let's say, TCAS, ACAS-X analysis, because every we are looking at turn on to final, right? So closely spaced. And so that was very problematic that it would smooth all these turns. And so I'm interested about that.
Exactly. Yeah. Actually, we had this discussion yesterday as well in dinner. There's also another issue with that, is the way the state vector table is built, because so every time we get a message, it updates some of the values in the state vectors, and sometimes then it happens for example, you don't get position data for a while, so it's propagating the past position, and then if it's an error with poor coverage, you would see the aircraft obviously it has been moving, but it appears it's still there, and then you have the other aircraft coming, and you see a collision, but you read the news and you don't see any collision in the news, right? So it's also some of the problem that we have with this way of building the state vectors. So there's actually one step that we apply before those filters, is to try to undo this forward fill pass in that has been done in the state vector table to invalidate all the values and try to reconstruct instead what's in between. But most of those filters, actually, what they do is just take irrelevant values and put non-values instead. And then if you want to do something more like smoothing and stuff, like those Kalman filters obviously do that. But if all the other ones, they just replace irrelevant values with non-values. And then you handle your non-values the way you want.
Gotcha. Okay, because that might answer the second question, which is a lot of this noise is non-normal, right? And many of the filters we're talking about, Kalman, mean, whatever, has some normality assumptions on the noise. Yeah. But here it's not at all, right?
Yeah, really, depending on the filters, like say, the point is mostly to, what I try to do is more to remove obviously irrelevant data.
Yeah. And I think the last thing that I would love to see, just so we can know whether our filters are worth submitting, is I think some sort of time versus performance, Pareto curve that we can look at.
True.
What are the best filters? Where do they lie?
Yeah.
Because I think I would love to contribute something, but it's not worth it if, to your point, an EKF takes way longer, but the performance gain is 0, right?
I didn't measure everything. Maybe that's one way to do. Then I mean, I think it's still nice to have even slow filters, because in some cases they were useful. And maybe it's the implementation is slow because the implementation is slow, and then maybe somebody is better at implementing the same idea that would be more efficient. So I think it's nice to have something rather than nothing. So even if it's a slow implementation, it's worth having, and somebody later will come and say, hey, that's slow, I will implement it in a better way, and then you get it for free. You get your own idea, better coded.
Thank you, Xavier, for the very nice presentation. I have a question, because there is going to be a boundary between what is a noise, what is actually outliers, right?
Yeah.
And is there a way to try to model this and then try to figure out which are the actual noise in the data, which are outliers? Yeah.
You can contribute.
I think I have an easier contribution.
No, I think it's that's also I voluntarily in the first part of the presentation I mixed the two, right? I showed some obvious outliers that are data that is probably corrupted, and there is also inherent noise because of the sensor that have been computing the values, and it's you are probably okay with the noise of the sensor, but like the noise of the physical phenomenon, let's say, and not okay with the outlier, like the corrupted noise.
Yeah, because in the end we want to keep this noise, but we want to remove outliers.
Yeah, for example, when this vertical rate noise that we have, it's actually very useful for this turbulence detection that we've been working on. We don't want to remove the noise. We actually want to analyze the noise. So we want to keep it and characterize the noise.
Yeah, I have another, maybe my first contribution for the consistent filter. If Richard think was a good idea, because you are essentially measuring the altitude, the distance, and consider that with the vertical rate, the speed, right? So it's more about kinematics of aircraft, and then can be called kinematic filter.
Yeah.
Right?
So actually. Richard knows more about this implementation. From a performance perspective, as Adam said, like right now the Kalman filter is faster than that, really? And the Kalman filter is actually, I mean, you put the equations, like the very basic equation, but you put the equations and it takes the derivatives together with the signal, and it's. So at the moment, I would rather use a filter, but I still like the idea that it should be. I think it should be there, and maybe we can find a faster way to implement it at some point.
from first glancing at the result, I think that filter works very well. Like the consistency, checking the consistency.
It's also
between the
depends on
kinematics.
the kind of noise pattern that you get in the data. That I think he implemented that because of some crazy patterns that were in data of the PRC challenge that has been pre-processed by someone in the room. Someone behind between the microphone and the chair.
That's why we remove the filtering. Well, good, great work. Thank you very much.
Great summary of all the issues that you have. Thanks for that presentation. I have
Sounded familiar?
Yes, sounded very familiar. I have two questions for you. One is, well, you showed a couple of nice pictures how the filters and all work like when they are already initialized. Have you looked into, or how do you do filter initialization? And what if the values are wrong when you start tracking any of these values?
Yeah, so that's actually the only filter I didn't present actually removed, or was also good at removing this filter. It was the one which was called filter clustering. So the plot is in the paper. I just tried to lighten the talk, but there's actually when you start with few wrong values and then get with the right ones, it's basically able to say there's a cluster value here, but there's a bigger one then that starts later, and let's just pick the bigger cluster. So that's the other filter that I didn't want to introduce, but you forced me to do it.
Sorry. So if I understand correctly, it works by looking at multiple variables at the same time, and like if they don't make sense, then you say, okay, something's odd, and you ignore the values or something like that.
Something like that.
All right.
The guy who coded it is sitting next to you, so you can ask.
Okay, good. Perfect. All right. The second question is, like, most aviation systems, they have accuracy and integrity requirements. Accuracy is easily determined, but like in terms of integrity, have you ever looked into, in 99.9%, the values have to be correct ones that are output by any system? Have you ever looked into that and like compared maybe what was the situation before filtering as a passive, ADSB and Mode S data observer, and what is the situation after filtering?
No.
Okay, good. Then that was it.
Yeah, no.
Okay. I think we do have time for one more question. There's also one question in the chat.
Yeah. Hi, Xavier. Interesting. I will use a lot of stuff. Have you ever applied the filters the both ways, so forward and backward?
So that's the Kalman smoother actually does that.
It does that.
It's you characterize your noise, your uncertainty in one way, and then in the other way, and then you mix the two information to try to get the most probable thing. Yeah, but I only did that with Kalman because for the other ones I'm not sure they really make sense. I don't know. Maybe they do. Okay, so there's a question online. Are any of these filters being used to populate the state vectors that are for data store? Not at the moment. So there's basically there are other tables that are basicall one table for each of these BDS block that I mentioned earlier. And the state vector table is built by combining the information from all those tables, and there is this forward pass for filling the non-values that has been done. And the idea of implementing those filters is like most of us don't have control on the ways this state vectors that are for table is built. So we want to just come back with a way to handle the data the way it is. presented to us, and but I guess that the next step is also to come to say, well, maybe we should fix things in the implementation of this, the way this table has been built, and we can have this kind of discussions, later. I think there's something also that we appreciate about this table is that we get the raw data, the way it's collected, so we can do this kind of analysis about the noise that we see, about the inconsistencies that we see, and yeah, but it's also true that we like to have some already filtered tables that would work for most of the time. But yeah, there is always a corner case where, yeah, what you implement doesn't work for some situations. So it's still nice to have the original data kept, stored somewhere. I hope it answered your question.